What was the last plastic product that you've seen today? For me, it's probably the chairs in front of me or the sign behind me that does add wonderful decoration to the stage. But it's interesting to me how prevalent plastic is in our lives. We see it in so many forms, as car parts, as insulators, in single-use form. But after we use that single-use plastic, whether it be plastic bag, masks, cigarettes, or gloves, where do they go? Do we actually think of these things as the trash that we have generated? There's a huge disconnect between us, humans, and the trash that we produce. For one, I know that if I throw away one of those bottles on the screen into the trash bin, I would no longer think about it after. This would be something that would fly, evaporate from my mind, because I don't think of my plastic waste as my responsibility as soon as it hits the bottom of that bin. I don't think of it as my responsibility anymore, because I think I've done my duty, throwing the trash away. But this is exactly why it's an issue. Do we think that the plastic issue will go away as others come up with solutions and scientific innovations develop? Now, don't get me wrong. I am in no way trying to downplay the role of science in environmental responsibility and remediation. We have found so many ways to integrate innovations into our everyday lives. We have cassava bags instead of plastic bags. We have edible cups instead of plastic cups, bacteria that can break down plastic. And I'm even trying now with a little project of mine where I'm trying to break down plastic using mushrooms. These are all important, and they all have a role in our fight for the environment against the problem that we've caused. But there's just one problem. It's not nearly enough. We Indonesians, we generated 64 million tons of plastic waste in 2018. This means that we produce 2,400 kilograms per person of trash, of plastic trash. Or that's equivalent to the weight of one whole pickup truck. Multiply that by 265 million to account for the whole population. And so we need to change how we view plastic. We can't continue viewing our single-use plastic waste as something that's so external to us, because it is our responsibility, our trash, our problem. And so we need to view plastic as something that's so integral to our daily lives, but at the same time is something that has to be reduced as much as possible. However, perhaps we can also view plastic as something that can become worth salvaging. Let me walk you through a small scenario. You're going to the supermarket to buy a snack. You're going there, you bought the snack, you're going to the cashier, and for a lot of people, this would mean taking out their reusable bag. However, for a lot more others, this would mean taking that virtually free of charge plastic bag that the supermarket supplies. You put the snack in the bag, which the snack is probably wrapped in plastic as well. But you bring it home, maybe use the plastic bag once or twice again. But after a while, you're going to throw it to the bin. The issue is it doesn't end here, at least not at a molecular level. Thing is that plastic is not biodegradable. Nature is not used to this plastic because we created this plastic. It's man-made. It has bonds that nature is not used to breaking down yet or hasn't found an effective mechanism to. This is a picture of an Indomie packet that was created for the 55th Independence Day of Indonesia. It was found 19 years after it was created, and you can see how well it has stayed because just plastic doesn't degrade. If you look closely enough, you can even see the flavor of that instant noodle. And so plastic just persists in the environment after so long. And we know this. This is something that's been taught to me since elementary school up to middle school. And even now, I'm still learning about it all over again. So if it's such a huge problem and we know that, why is it still so widespread? Well, plastic, it's extremely useful. It's durable, lightweight, waterproof, it's cheap. But at the same time, these single-use plastics are the very things that cause the strangulation, the choking, the uncontrollable floating of marine organisms when they encounter or consume these plastics. And that's only for marine organisms and only what we see. We haven't even talked about other water bodies that are polluted with plastic trash. We haven't talked about land pollution, how it's affected by plastic, how toxins leach into the environment and damage soil. We haven't talked about the grueling, risky, damaging extraction process to obtain the raw materials to create the plastics, nor the process it takes to create the plastics themselves, and the toxins and emissions and fumes that it releases. But perhaps what's most relevant to all of us is how plastics have put us in an experiment we have no control of whatsoever. When plastic goes to the environment, it actually breaks down at a physical level. A lot of it breaks down to what's known as microplastics, pieces of plastics less than 5 millimeters in length. Now the thing is, these microplastics, they're abundant. They're so abundant to the point where it's mixed with our sand, it's in our water, it's on our land. And because it's so abundant, the marine animals, they consume these plastics. In turn, the fish, squid, shrimp that we eat, they all contain microplastics. We're putting microplastics into our own body, and we have no idea what the outcome of this will be. Even if we don't really consume seafood, microplastics have been found in our table salt. Whether sourced from the mountains or from the oceans, microplastics are in our salt that we consume almost every day. And that's why plastic is everyone's problem, because everybody is affected. You may think that your contributions to plastic waste isn't that much. I'm very guilty of thinking this, of thinking that since I haven't touched a plastic bag in a while, it's fine if I use it again. At a personal, individual level, that sounds like a very valid statement. However, think about half of your classroom using plastic bags. Then think about half your school. Then think about half of the city using plastic bags. Then think about Indonesia. And think about the rest of the world using plastic bags. Because that no longer sounds like a valid statement, considering the scale at which we produce single-use plastics. And that's why we need to throw away culture. Sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? But throwaway culture is the idea that the materials we produce, plastics, are destined to be thrown away before they're even produced. The name itself, single-use plastics, already implies that we're going to throw away, we're going to just dispose of these plastics before they're even produced or used. And this is damaging on so many levels because not only are we guaranteeing the polluting of the earth and the continuation of this landfill, but we're also undermining the value that actually many plastics have. According to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, if we just cut down 20% of global single-use plastic production and replace it with reusables, we'd be saving at least $10 billion. If we throw away this throwaway culture just by 20%, we'd be saving $10 billion US. If you don't think that's a lot, well, that's more than 3 times the GDP of Bhutan in 2019. Think about how much money can be put into education, into healthcare, into waste management, into running whole countries. But instead, we choose to produce this material that only lasts and lasts and lasts in the environment and only damages. Which is why we need to change how we view plastic, really. But this may be a bit of a long stretch for you. You don't see how exactly plastic has value. There are more obvious ways. Recycling. Now, recycling is littered with controversies because there's that debate of whether it generates even more emissions than using virgin material, or whether it's actually effective because some recycling systems aren't established. But I'd like to ask you this. Would you rather throw your plastic to the landfill, where it's almost guaranteed to break down indefinitely? Or would you rather have your plastic be sent to a recycling center when there is at least the opportunity that these plastics can be converted into a new material that can be used over and over and over again? I know that I would opt for recycling. And when you recycle, you earn money, and who doesn't want money? But there are other ways that our country has shown that plastic has value. For instance, the city Surabaya, it's used plastics as a currency. What they do is instead of using paper money to buy bus tickets, they use a certain amount of plastic bottles. This is something that's really encouraged by the people there. They collect plastic bottles and they use it to buy the bus tickets that'll last them 2 hours. This is such a win-win situation. It's something that's run and continued by the people, for the people, and the environment. Because these plastic bottles are sold to recycling centers, and the money earned is used to run public transport systems, but also helping with other environmental initiatives. Even then, when we view plastic as something that will be recycled, in a sense, we're still viewing it as something that we will throw away. So this is how we're currently viewing plastics. This is what's known as the linear economy. This is where we're just throwing away mounds and mounds of plastic for it to never be used again. However, there's a concept that takes the sustainability of plastic even further: a circular economy. This is the concept, the vision, where we're trying to reuse plastic over and over and over again, eliminating unnecessary plastic use, trying to make plastic safe and non-toxic, and most importantly, keeping plastic within the economy and out of the environment. This is the type of vision, this type of mindset that we must have, that we must aspire towards, that we must pursue. Not only does this keep plastic out of the environment, but this also means that by reusing plastic over and over again, we'd be viewing it as a material that has value because it can be converted into something else that's more useful. This would be very difficult to achieve if we have the mindset that plastics are only things that are disposable, because it actually can have value. To aspire towards a circular economy, there's so much that we can do. I'd also like to point out how we often don't address the elephant in the room when we're talking about plastic waste or environmental damage. The role that corporations, industries, governors, leaders have on environmental damage, the impact that they carry. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, 21% of global greenhouse gas emissions came from industries, while in comparison, 14% were from global transportation. Think about how many more people use transportation and how little in comparison run industries. We must realize really the impact and role that these industries have on plastic production, on environmental damage. And we must hold them accountable, because as much as we want to fight for our environment, as much as we want to fight against the trash, the problem that we have produced, we need to make sure that those who are responsible are also fighting against their own trash. And we can do so by urging governments to create better regulations, to urge the creation of infrastructure such as recycling centers or composting sites for the betterment of the environment. We must tackle this problem holistically, and one of the methods are by urging the people in power to remember the power that they have on the environment. Although so, we're viewing plastic as a pollutant still, and that's not a completely wrong mindset. Plastic, at the current state of things, they are pollutants, and they are something that we must reduce as much as possible. But there's more than one way to actually curb this plastic waste. Sure, there are the innovations that I mentioned in the beginning, those fabric made out of algae, those mushrooms that are used to make foam instead of styrofoam. There's a bunch of it. But we must also remember that there was a time when we did not rely on plastics. Because plastic production, it really only boomed in the 1950s. And so actually, single-use plastics, they replaced a lot of the tools that we already had, the tools that were natural, that were processed, but not too processed to the point where the environment could not break it down into the useful materials anymore. Let me give you an example. In my country, Indonesia, we use the midribs of banana leaves. What happens is that we take it and it's dried, it turns into string, and we can weave it into sandals and bags. Banana leaves are also used for food packaging instead of plastic wrap. We have baskets out of bamboo to carry items instead of plastic bags. Now, we must make use of these solutions that have already existed for so long because we know that they work. They carry out their own function, and it's been used for generations upon generations. And so innovations in combination with these things that we know work will make our tackling of this plastic issue that we have created much more effective. You might say that all of these things are pretty complicated, that these methods, these replacements are not as economical as plastic. And with that, I have to agree with you. But I want you to think about your routine. Think about your daily life. Think about it meticulously. How many times a day do you interact with single-use plastics? This might seem like a basic question, but it really took me by surprise when I did it. I was surprised when I found out that my soap had microplastics in addition to the plastic packaging that it already had. I was surprised, really, that I actually still used those Ziploc bags in order to carry my utensils every day. And once we start thinking about how present plastic is in our lives, we start thinking about our role in the usage and production of plastics. We start viewing plastic as our own problem because you get to see how much you contribute to the waste. If you still think that perhaps it is impractical, still expensive, to replace these single-use plastics with natural methods, with environmental friendly materials, I want to ask you this question. What price are you willing to pay for the earth, for our future? Because the way that we're running things, it's no longer sustainable. The earth can no longer contain it. We have to afford only what the earth can afford. And so it's our responsibility to really view these plastics as a material that is of our own. It's our responsibility to afford only what the earth can afford too. Thank you.